The troops are still armed with muzzle-loading single-shot weapons, but they're no longer muskets, they're rifle. Famous rebel yell. I'm now standing behind the Confederate line. Just like the British troops we saw in the Napoleonic battle, formed 2 ranks deep, behind wooden rail fences, and now the Union troops withdrawing over the bridge. But we can see on the top of the hill, ladies and gentlemen, Napoleonic wars. Many of the guns are now rifled, and in fact the favourite Union artillery piece was the rifled 6-pounder. This would have a range of nearly 2,000 yards and could fire shell or ball. A very deadly weapon. Now taking advantage of the situation, moving up to the bridge, and now in column they're going to move over the bridge as quickly as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, give a cheer for the Confederate troops as they go forward. Give them a cheer! And now the Confederates are bringing some of their own guns onto the battlefield. The Confederates found it very difficult to get hold of artillery, so they either, if possible, imported it from you. Very poor indeed. And the Union troops still withdrawing. They And now the Tennessee infantry shout out their battle cry and possibly prepare to advance. I'm standing now behind these confident Confederates. Got some troops here from Carolina, the very first state to secede from the Union.
Yeah, I saw them come in a minute ago.
They all come from different states, but they all consider themselves to be members of this new country, the Confederate States of America. They're desperately looking for aid from Britain or from France. Troops on this battlefield from that position.
Some flags there, look, them 3 flags at the back.
And now if you look to the hill as well, you can see, yes, you can see some Union reinforcements now arriving on the battlefield. General Sheridan, the commander of the Union Corps, or the Union Army in the valley, is now rushing reinforcements to this position as quickly as possible. They're either marching or they're using the new railways. Railways made a difference to warfare. Troops could be moved around far more quickly, and it wouldn't tire them out by marching hundreds of miles. And in fact, the Confederate victory at First Bull Run was won because the Confederates could rush up reinforcements by rail and outflank the Union position to that line. In most American Civil War battles, the Confederates were outnumbered anywhere up to 2 to 1. And it is a thing to say about their great fighting spirit. And now the Confederate guns return fire, counter-battery fire against the Union guns on the hill. But we can see one of the Confederates sent back as a runner to pass on a message. But the Confederate, they fought, they had carried the position. But now with the Union up, Confederate artillery again has brought up the bulk of the infantry of his corps, and the Union troops are now advancing back down the hill, and again the Union guns bark out. 1 or 2 casualties fall within the Confederate ranks.
States' rights, and we want to fight for those rights. The right to govern, to to have our own independence and to make our own laws, not to be dictated to by the Yankee northern dictators.
There we have a defiant message there from a junior Confederate officer. They consider themselves to be a new, bright... Confederate guns all firing together there. But now, ladies and gentlemen, we can see the Confederate infantry is being forced back across the river.
That's the Rock Bridge artillery.
They went across Cedar Creek, they marched up the hill, and now they've marched back down again and been forced back across. And the Union skirmishers coming back across the bridge now.
Well, the horses coming over.
Yeah, they do a charge.
Troops with bucktails in their hats, possibly from Ohio.
That's good, the one with the flag as well. I'm on getting it.
And now Union cavalry coming back over the river.
This is actually our first Union.
But this is a dangerous move by the Union troops. They're well exposed. If the Confederates counterattack now, they could be in desperate trouble. But I've been told that Jubal Early is quite confident that his men can now hold this line. He's confident that the Confederate troops will be able to stop the Northern troops from crossing the river.
Got him in there.
But now the Union are putting their close order infantry across the river. Heavy Confederate fire pouring into their ranks. But the Union morale is holding and they're still advancing. This is a hard thing to do, to advance against enemy fire.
Stop, mate, just opened up.
The Union infantry crossing the bridge, deploying to their right-hand side.
I'm slow. Look at that 10 guns.
Now, the Union troops deploying into line, having taken some casualties coming across the bridge. Firing. This is where most of the casualties on both sides will be taken. These rifles have got an effective range of 200 or 300 yards accuracy. They can fire 500 or 600 yards, unlike the muskets that we saw earlier. So this is now point-blank range.
Spoken!
I'm standing now behind the lines of the Confederate infantry. I can actually hear the Union bullets whistling over my head. But these brave men stand here, they load, they fire, bring over our heads. And every now and again a bullet finds its target and another man goes down. And now in the ranks of the Confederate infantry they fire yet again. I can see many of these Confederate troops are armed with British three-band Enfield rifles. These obviously must have got through the blockade at some point earlier in the war. And now the Union artillery is beginning to find its target. Pouring a heavy fire into Confederate lines. And on the left-hand side of the Confederate line, we can see the Union troops attacking with the bayonets, coming in at close order. Confederates being pushed back. Literally a man has just dropped ill. The carnage is dreadful. The stench of death is all around. And still the Union troops come on. They are utterly determined to push the Confederates from this ground. Some of the Confederate troops now breaking and fleeing. Boys, don't run! They're running, they're fleeing! They've obviously had enough. And now I can see some of the Confederate troops have surrendered. And the Union troops now moving on the Confederate gun line. Confederate gunners defending themselves. Many of the Confederate troops have now surrendered. Union have captured the Confederate gun line and are outflanking the Confederate position. Confederate gunners desperately, and now the Confederates are being pushed back to one tiny corner of the battlefield. There's confusion and there's fear in these places. The men don't know what's going on. And this is one of the last independent Confederate armies in Virginia. They must not be lost. Confederates still trying to hold their ground.
Coming in on here.
But the situation is getting more and more desperate for them. And now the Union infantry press forward, getting to within 50 yards, point blank range with these rifles. But still these brave Confederate troops stand their ground. How much longer can they keep it up for? And another swathe of Confederate troops goes down as the Union body crashes out. And now in the centre of the Confederate infantry, cavalry still fighting mounted. Troops now moving forward. In a double line in close order, just like we saw the British Redcoats in the previous battle. And now the second company of Confederate infantry moving forward. Union troop. There the Confederates confidently advancing upon the Union position. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Confederate infantry now crossing the bridge of Cedar Creek.
Oh, there's the bomb now.
Now crossing over the bridge, moving for the Confederacy. It is vital, though, that Jubal early this battle. The valley must not fall. If the valley falls, then the Confederacy has lost a vital supply of food. The valley grows much of the corn and the wheat used in the Confederacy. And this is why Lincoln is insistent to Sheridan that the valley be cleared. No Confederate officer seems available to send the troops across the bridge.
Flares, isn't it?
I'm now standing next to the officer of the Confederacy. Sir, would you give me your name and your rank?
I'm Major Raphael Jacob Moses. I am in charge of the Commissary Department for the Confederate Army. My job is to provide the food.
And all of a sudden, this battle has turned round. Just a few short minutes ago, there were Confederate troops up. And with these long-range rifles that now the armies have, the casualties are dropping like flies all around me. The bullets are literally whistling over my head. Although the Confederates have been forced back, their morale is still holding firm. The Yankee troops have crossed the bridge, but they still have a lot of hard work to do. Clarendon is going to win the Battle of Sydenham Creek. He must force the Confederate troops from the field. And this will not be an easy objective to achieve. They built themselves temporary defences, known as a bartis. They're now hiding behind these wooden defences, which has given them some advantage in the firefight that's now taking place. But still more Union troops are pouring across that breach. And every man that comes across that breach is going to make it harder for the Confederates to win this day. Although the Union artillery is a long way off on that hill, because they're rifled guns, it's still relatively Just look at all that smoke. Listen to that noise. Confederate gunners, their grey uniforms, their red keppies, desperately loading the guns. It's at this short range that they can do a lot of damage to the Union infantry, but they must keep firing, loading and firing as quickly as possible.
That guy just went down.
Now we can see on the Confederates' left-hand flank, the Union troops trying to work round the flank, coming in. Enfield rifles that these men are armed with. Shoot the Union troops. And the British don't know which way to turn. Pushing, shoving each other. Stand, hold your ground. No, retire. On the left-hand flank, Union infantry advancing, almost in a position to take the guns. There is now complete fear and confusion in the Confederate ranks. And yes, I can see some of the Confederate troops have now surrendered. They're holding their muskets up reversed. They've surrendered the Union bluecoats. The rebels, the Confederates from the field. And now the Confederates decide in a desperate countercharge. The last throw of the dice, ladies and gentlemen. If they can drive the Union troops off, maybe they can still win the day. Their charge has faltered. They've got to the gun line, but they can get no further. Union troops pouring in heavy fire on the Confederate flanks. Busiest on this battlefield is a Confederate padre.
Oh, Sminter's got shot.
Dispensing the last rites to the dead and the dying.
Oh, he's getting back out again.
The Confederate troops still withdrawing. Pinned now into the corner of the battlefield. Union artillery, too much. General Sheridan of the Union Army looks as though he will be the victor here this day. Stand.
Oh, it took me back there.
And now the Confederate troops